Good afternoon or morning or evening, Presbytery of Philadelphia, wherever you may be or whenever you may be listening or viewing this conversation. Welcome to our second episode of Conversations at the Well, a series of podcast episodes through Presby Speak, where we are intentionally engaging some of our local pastors and ministry leaders among us who are finding ways to enter into the living waters of Christ in these unique times in our greater Philadelphia region. Today's conversation, we have four gifted leaders in our midst who are navigating the challenges of hunger and homelessness in our cities, especially in the midst of this pandemic. And we're aware that hunger and homelessness is something that is not limited to our urban context, but is something that also plagues our suburban communities and our rural communities too. But we also know that there are some unique challenges that are faced by those serving in the city. And so we wanted to kind of take this time to hear from these four gifted leaders who are doing work in Chester and in various parts of Philadelphia. So thank you all for joining us today from your spaces. I'm going to just invite you to each take a moment to share a little bit about who you are and your ministry context. And we'll start with Zuline, if you can just share a bit.
Hi, everybody. What a blessing to be a part of this conversation. I'm Zuline Gray Wilkinson, and I'm the Executive Director of Chester Eastside in Chester, Pennsylvania. I've been the Executive Director there since October of 2016, and we have appreciated the love and support of the Presbytery during my tenure and for many years prior.
It's been a very vital ministry in a sister city, a sibling city, if you will, of Philadelphia, and we're grateful for the work that you do there. Schaunel, can you share a bit about who you are?
Sure. My name's Schaunel Steinnagel, and I've been working with the Welcome Church since around 2013 and in a formal relationship. And I was a big supporter of the Welcome Church in its formative years before that. And the Welcome Church is a congregation made up of people experiencing chronic street homelessness in Center City, Philadelphia. And it's a congregation in development in the ELCA.
And for those who are not familiar, ELCA is the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, who have been incredible partners for a long time with our presbytery, and grateful for your work down there as well. Adan.
Hello, my name is Adan Mairena. I'm the pastor at Adan Presbyterian Church and at West Kensington Ministry in North Philadelphia.
Great. Adan, thank you for your work too. And last but not least, Chris.
I'm Chris Holland, community pastor at the Commonplace, 501c3 nonprofit in Southwest Philadelphia, and also the executive pastor at Salt and Light Community Church, formerly known as New Spirit Community Presbyterian Church.
Thank you, Chris. I know you wear enough hats, right?
Yeah, I need more heads.
Well, we're so grateful for each of you for joining us. And Chris, why don't we stay with you for a moment? If you could just share a little bit about how you have seen the reality of COVID-19 impact hunger and homelessness in your community, and especially how does this compare to pre-pandemic realities?
Well, for sure, pre-pandemic, we knew that food insecurity was something that was, happening in our community, but it wasn't one of the missions that we initially were a part of. We focused more so on education for children, supporting families. But when the pandemic hit, it kind of shut down all of our operation. And knowing that food insecurity was still a thing, we began to receive requests from the community and folks that we had been serving, asking about food. And we said, you know what, we have to switch up our mission right now. We have to get into this. So in March, when things began to happen, we realized that we needed to pivot, and we did. And we started a food program, a food bank that we still run now. And actually, it kind of goes back to what the church had done 30 years prior. They had always been a part of dealing with food insecurity in the neighborhood before time we had stopped. And going beyond that a little bit, we realized that a lot of folks are giving out food in our community, but a lot of it isn't necessarily nutrient dense food. or the things that folks really need to get into their systems. So we looked around. We know that we're a food desert as it comes to healthy food. So we really focused in on getting nutrient dense, healthy veggies and all those types of things to our constituents.
I appreciate how you share about how you've switched up your mission and pivoting. One of the things that knowing you for a while that has been fun to see as you posted this, a green thumb is not exactly what you went to seminary for or trained for, right?
Yeah, up until now, I didn't even realize that my thumb could be green. I'm a city kid. I grew up in Philadelphia, so we had a little yard growing up. So getting into this, growing food and being connected back to the earth is new for me right now, but it's become very real and a part of my life. So we're in it.
I think that's a huge source of comfort for a lot of folks as they're trying to figure out what their mission and ministry is in this time, is recognizing that you can do this. You don't, experimenting and trying new things. And it's beautiful to see how God has through the Spirit has allowed people to do some creative extensions of the gospel, especially responding to food insecurity. So thanks for your witness there. I'm going to turn this to Zuline a little bit. I know that hunger has been something that has been kind of the backdrop for a lot of the work of Chester Eastside. Can you speak to that a little bit as well, and especially how COVID has impacted your work? Zuline, you're muted.
Okay. Wouldn't come off. I am so apologetic. For over 30 years, we've been involved in the whole issue of food insecurity. And during COVID, no different. We are still continuing to serve on Mondays and Wednesdays, 2 days a week. But we've also had to be nimble, as Pastor Holland had said. We haven't been able to do things in the same way that we had traditionally. What we learned was that our space is such that we needed to modify it. So we have literally transformed what we do. We always would offer congregate meals. So in addition to being a food outpost, we were also a place where people could come, the hungry and the homeless, and they could enjoy a meal together and have some socialization. We immediately discontinued that during COVID, and we've moved to giving a bag lunch or bag breakfast to people who come in and who need an immediate meal. What we also have noticed is that there is food everywhere. Chris mentioned that as well, and perhaps the others will note that too. Food is coming out of the corners everywhere in Chester. The problem is there's very little coordination. And so lots of congregations and lots of other nonprofits have decided to get into what we might call the food space, but there's no coordination about how that's done or how long the programs will continue. So that's been a concern that has impacted us. We noticed, and I'll stop here, we thought that we were seeing less people because we weren't seeing our regulars anymore as we thought. But what we have found is that we've gotten just about 50% new clients during this period of COVID. So more people are venturing out who had never asked for food before and are using us for services. Our regulars are a lot of the elderly, and they have been very reluctant, and their children have said, don't come out. And so we've had to, again, be nimble and get food to senior centers and senior high-rises in an effort to keep people prepared and fed during this time. So we've just, lots of different ways. The kids in our out-of-school time programs, they're home now. And so parents who had been working are home, but so are their children. 3 or 4 children in addition to parents are home. And that's a drain on limited resources. So we have also then included that group of people in those that we serve. We don't regularly serve bagged foods to them, but we have started because the need is there. So we've done a lot of changing and modifying because we've needed to in order to meet needs.
And I think it's an interesting thing that you brought up, is that the challenge has been coordination, not so much the quantity of food. It sounds like there's been a lot of resources out there, but the distribution of it has been a challenge, which for me turns it to Adan. Adan, that's been somewhat of your bread and butter lately, pun intended, when we're talking about food. And it has been the distribution and making sure that all of these food resources get in the hands of the people that need them. So can you speak a little bit about that and how that's framed some of your work in West Kensington?
Well, it's like everybody else, we had to adapt, pivot. Can you hear me? Okay, we had to just really get as relevant as we can, and we had a small food pantry before that was just emergency, based on emergencies. But since March, we became one of the cities. I think they had 40 across the city that distributed food on Mondays and Thursdays. So we became one of the city's 40 sites, and it all worked out really in an interesting way. We have a relationship with this organization called Easter Outreach, and our partner church in Ardmore. They used to come through Ardmore on Easter, well, like Holy Saturday, and give out like a box of food or something. But they too decided to since they were not just going to be able to do Holy Saturday, they were going to start doing weekly. So through them, we received up to 10,000 pounds of food a week, right? But then through the city, we started getting the Monday and Thursdays distribution. So Mondays is they would deliver pallets of food, like anywhere between 400 to 600 boxes, and we'd get volunteers. So the city had a website where volunteers would come. I had neighbors, people from the church. So I'm blessed that there is an infrastructure that through my councilwoman and one of the deputies from the city and Easter Outreach and the city's volunteer website that we're able to do that. So our space totally changed. It's like a warehouse for food now. A beautiful thing is that we've gotten commercial refrigerators donated. So because we've been able to do that, we're able to store more food. Like Chris was saying, just like a lot of Philly and Southwest, we're a food desert. And we've been so for a long time, although gentrification is taking place and lots of development, we're still a food desert. So now it's really, I would say it's like 75% of my work. The city did stop about 3 weeks ago delivering the pallets of food, but we're still getting enough through Easter Outreach deliveries, about 2 or 3 a week. So we still distribute about the same amount, but now we have to pack it and make sure it gets out. So, and we've added to that, voter registration, census, registration. So thank God there's, like a lot of you guys, I'm sure we have partner churches that send volunteers. So that's been a blessing. So
I appreciate you hearing you say some of that. I mean, you've done a great job with connecting to a lot of not only partners in distribution, but also local leaders who have helped you with the access to it. And what is beautiful about your work down there in West Kensington too, Adan, has been how you've used this as an opportunity for people to elevate their own voice and advocacy and local issues. So using this as a chance for voter registration is remarkable. and that's no small thing. I mean, Schaunel, I know that your ministry here, we come to you kind of last in this first wave of conversation, mostly because homelessness and hunger is like a great intersection for you and your work with your neighbors at the Welcome Church. Can you share a little bit about how that's been a part of your ministry of late, especially in the midst of this pandemic and COVID-19?
Sure. I mean, I'll sort of try to go a little bit in historical order going back to March, because the first thing to follow up on what Adan said, the first thing that happened is a whole lot of things shut down that existed. And so, and you know, suddenly and chaotically and everything. And I think there was, you know, even confusion, people going to places where they had formerly gone to find out something was closed and everything. I would say the city did a very good job at helping to provide structure and assistance at a needed time as far as helping to open up additional city sort of backed sites, both outdoor feeding sites and additional places where anyone could go and get a box of groceries, such as Adan talked about. I'm sorry, my son is here making his lunch, so I'm a little distracted. And the reason I think that was both really important and good is to no one's surprise on this call, I think that it's sort of very obvious that to say that we need to address hunger solely on the back of a volunteer network of churches is, you know, an idea that would be very much full of potential holes. And if nobody was aware of that before March of this year, all of a sudden it became, you know, obvious because all the holes became gaping, and then some more structure and assistance was able to be added. So I'm greatly appreciative of the assistance that got added in, and I kind of, you know, I let's all end hunger and homelessness, but I hope we see that part of that can be through remembering that we need, you know, centralized and government backup on what volunteers and churches are willing and able to do. Obviously, people didn't disappear out there. As far as my folks out on the Parkway, I started going into everything came to a screeching halt, but I started going into the city on the first Sunday of every month just to sort of bring greetings. Folks were always out there on the Parkway, and yeah, they would make lovely conversation, but it'd be a common observation, well, no one really comes out anymore, as far as bringing food out to the Parkway, and as far as you know, relationship building. And I mean, it just sort of hit me in thinking about that people are, you know, are survivors. They've been out there through all kinds of things, and they're out there now, and so not like everybody either instantly died from starvation or from lack of social contact or anything. But so to if anything, this revealed what always was, that we have hunger and we have homelessness, and we have a lot of people who are going to be struggling to get by, and this heightened a lot of those needs, but it also just revealed them to like kind of wake up and see what's there all along.
You know, could I also respond to that? The whole issue that the volunteer sector and the church sector should take up everything, I believe, has certainly been amplified in this whole thing. And we've had to say that as Chester Eastside, that we need support from a variety of partners, and you can't rely on only small nonprofits that are faith-based in order to get this work done. During COVID, our volunteers have decreased by 30% because they have been nervous about coming out and being involved with vulnerable publics. And that's something that I don't believe gets spoken about very often. In Delaware County, there was a Delaware County volunteer corps that we were able to associate with, and we got volunteers for a while, but it's time limited. So now we're back to a situation where people want to give us lots of food, and we don't even have the volunteers to help us unload it and to put it into the freezers and to pack it on the shelves. Um, this week we're going to get a load of, I think they said 2,000 pounds of food that will go to pantries all around our area. We don't have anybody that can help us right now get that. And so I think the whole issue of what underlies these systems has been a fallacy. People haven't had to think about hunger and homelessness in this way before. And those of us who've been doing it for a long time, I'm concerned about the volunteers who are remaining. I worry about them and their vulnerabilities.
Yes, our volunteer base has also decreased. The blessing is that I'm in a very residential area. So, and I live next to the church. So there are neighbors that help, and again from the volunteer through Easter outreach, but definitely it has decreased. But because since we've been doing it since March, there's that core group that sticks around. A lot of people are getting back to whatever their normal is now. So that was one reason why it decreased. And then the truth is, you know, at first, this is like, you know, it's really self-fulfilling to volunteer, and it's sexy, and it's like, yeah, you know, everybody's excited, everybody's gung-ho, but after about 2 months, people are like, you know, even myself, you know, we went from just a lot, and after a while, it's like, I didn't sign up for this, you know, I didn't go to seminary for this, like, I actually missed like preaching and Bible study after a while, although we were doing it, but now it's really like balancing the worship and Bible study and relationships aspect with the whole other ministry. And that really, you know, because one is like, you know, we know church, right? Like we've been doing it for a while, so we know that. But then to start like another type of church community with volunteers and people feeding people, and then people coming out of the woodwork when the church isn't open and knocking at the door and saying, you know, we couldn't make it. It's a whole other, it's another type of ministry. And I think for those of us that did it, like we would dip our toe in it and do it every now and then, to all of a sudden do it 3-4 times a week and have to think about logistics and pounds of food and storing it, and it takes a toll. So I agree with you that the volunteer factor has gone down, and now it's, you know, it's harder, but you can't back out. So, and there are churches that at first were really into it, and after a while it's like, oh, we can't do this anymore, and it's okay. So as we although the city no longer is doing the 40, I think they named like 20 sites that they still list as part of their network, like in their websites and all that. So we're still one of them. So it's not as though we can say like, you know, we're done and we're not going to do that. We don't want to do that, but we don't have a choice now either. But being where we are, if, you know, we have to do this.
It sounds like what I'm hearing is a lot of the intersection of worship and work. Those lines have been blurred so much now. I mean, it's tough to even separate the two at all anymore for a lot of our congregations and communities. Seeing that to responding to these needs of their vulnerable neighbors is, I mean, it's right there all the time. But at the same time, it's also exposed how when it comes to care for the neighbor, care for those who are hungry and thirsty and who are in need of shelter. For those who have thought that was a social issue separate from the church issue, or those who thought it was just a church issue apart from working with the systems, that whole sense of like binary reality is gone. For those who weren't already aware of it, this whole pandemic has once again exposed it, that the church cannot deal with this just as a church issue. It has to be in conversation with the systems and with other partners and organizations, because the need is too great to do this alone.
And not to be, you know, a broken record from former existences I've had, but things like broader backup to things like SNAP, you know, which the AKA food stamps and other supports for people. This isn't just the business of a volunteer network. There's just no way that a volunteer network can handle the holes that are going to happen when crises happen, at the very least, if not in your day to day. And we need, you know, people need a holistic system backing them up.
And let me hold on to that for Chris. Were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say all of this just speaks to the fragility of the system that we have in general. It's just, and we get to see it now for sure, when we can't do business as usual, all the broken pieces and all of the holes that exist, and how I think Zuline said earlier that there isn't true communication between small groups, but as well as the city governments as well, because everyone was scrambling to try to figure out how this was going to work. And it was all an emergency basis, where now, getting back to business as usual to some degree, the issue's still there, but there was no way that, you know, folks could keep up with the same energy and capacity as previously. So it was like, so how do we really look at the fragility of our system and start to talk about how we begin to fix that? Because, you know, a lot of things that are happening today are not going to be sustainable for the future. You know, so I'm waiting for that conversation to happen in a broader sense at some point, not here, but, you know, in our communities.
But that's one of the things that I really believe is important for the church and important for us who work in the intersection between the public arena and the church. I'm doing some study now, and I'm really very focused on how is it that some churches can respond to the Matthew mandate to feed the hungry and the homeless and the naked, and others don't see that as intrinsic in the word. I think that everybody may not be able to do everything, but we really need to sow into our teaching and into our preaching what Jesus is saying, that there are consequences, and we don't want to talk about those. There are consequences when people are not fed, and when people are not clothed, and when people are homeless. And we see those consequences right now in our society. And so we have to look at the systems that have grown up, that have kind of hidden what we know to be the case. They're social systems that disproportionately affect people of color.
Well, there, you know, as you were talking about the elderly, and I'm thinking about all the people in the shadows, who are people with disabilities, you know,
Yes.
elderly folks. We have a senior center across the street. Thank God they're well taken care of, but they still come. People that are disabled, some come, some, you know. I have had to, and then undocumented folks.
Yes.
So for a while, and still, but at a lesser level, undocumented folks are not, because we had the sheriff, the city asked the sheriff, the county sheriffs to be here, and I asked for the sheriffs to be here, and police we have a good relationship with our police district, and it was good to have them. They're part of the community, and they actually help, and like it became a community for months. But then as you know, with what happened in Minnesota and the protesting and all that, the sheriff's department and the police had to go start addressing that. But all this is to say that undocumented people they did not come and stand in lines because they saw law enforcement. And I would explain to them, like, look, they're not ICE. They're not here to deport you, but you can imagine their fear. So for a while, and still now, it would be like a clandestine, like, okay, you text me when you're 10 minutes out, and then you come in and we give you food. But those, you know, the people in the shadows, and obviously the systemic, like asking, why do we have to do this? But we can get very cerebral and think about systems and this and that. And it's again, like that tension. It's like, okay, well, let's have conversations about why this, why that, but then we still got to do the work. So I struggle with that too, because I can get carried away in the why and the why and the why, and then have to balance out, well, like, okay, people are helping, and the churches that aren't, I mean, there's churches that have limited capacity to do so. You know, a lot of the small little Pentecostal evangelical storefront churches right now, they can't, because they don't have the resources. And sometimes, even before this, it wasn't part of their, I don't know, their practice to get involved in social justice issues. It's more about just worship, Bible study, conversion, salvation. And then the other, you know, the social justice side was never really part of their ministries. So I really, you know, and this is not to knock on them, but so I really, you know, we really don't expect that here in my neighborhood. I think because of our tradition, you know, we could do no otherwise.
Well, I appreciate you sharing all that, for all of you reminding us of the complexity of responding to hunger and homelessness as a people of faith, especially, and how it's complex. It involves both the heart and the mind, even more so the imagination. But let's bring this into the theological side of things. Adan, you're reminding us that for so long that, again, there was this binary that takes place in terms of engaging real issues and or our call as a worshiping people. But it's clear that it's not and or, it's a both and. So let me ask you this. When it comes to the work that you all are doing in response to hunger and homelessness, how have you seen this as an extension of your call, and even more so leaning into your sense of discipleship and what it means to be Christians?
I could start, because I felt for many years that I was an anomaly, because I was called to be a social worker, and I was also involved in ministry, actively engaged in ministry. And there hasn't been a recognition up until now, I think, that a call to the gospel can be a call to service. And it is not only a call to the prophetic ministry, but it is also a call to minister to people where they are. So I'm feeling like, if there's anything that I can do to help congregations understand that ministry is not something that is binary, as you're referencing it, but that ministry takes on many different elements. I just want to share one thing that came to me from scripture. Last week, I was thinking about this. In Acts, the 6th chapter, the first confusion that we see in the church was around hunger. The first big meeting, the first big change in the structure of the early church had to do with calling of deacons who would take care of people who, because of a racial discrimination, they felt it was racial discrimination, were left out of the distribution. That's been with us since the beginning of time. When a few chapters earlier, the word says that they had everything in common. So what happens that we have everything in common, and a few chapters later, we have contention. over the haves and the have-nots and who is whom because of where they were born or their culture. So this is an ongoing issue that the church has struggled with, and I don't think we can be silent even now. It was a tension then, it is a tension now, and we have to work, as did the early church, to try to come to a resolution.
Wow, that is gospel preaching right there. Holy smoke, that's like a seminary course. Somebody want to build on that? Good luck.
I guess this has been my, I had a lengthy process through a committee on preparation for ministry quite a long time ago in my life, in that I always said I was going to do something different. And so that was sometimes a hard communication to have with a CPM a number of years ago. And I've remarked on a number of occasions in the past several years that this is what I'm doing now is the most traditional church work I've ever done, in that I'm preaching regularly and things like that. But I sort of have never really worked in a church building, and I've never had a job where I worked every Sunday, really, where my primary responsibility was standing up and leading worship service. And I just can't read the Bible and not be pushed towards issues of economic justice. And if anything, I've had in a variety of positions, obviously, including now, I have a variety in ministries that have a variety of partners who aren't the church, and in a most traditional definition of the sense. And I've sometimes, there's that disillusioned millennial generation or whatever, boy, am I getting old, but the people who are my age and just younger than me that don't go to church. And I'm an anomaly for my generation in that I'm in church every Sunday. And how many times I've been working on people on a project, and there is a certain discomfort that I sense on their part that I do represent. I come in saying, here I am with the church, so or whatever I say, like I'm here. Formerly, I worked for the Presbytery. I'd say here I am in the Hunger Action Enabler for the Presbytery of Philadelphia. Some people would kind of readjust their seats on that. And I find myself praying for those in those instances that, that we can create a church that is that expresses an openness to these people who are doing all of this work for us, and yet don't feel comfortable in what we have going on. So I've been in this setting in that sense for a long time, and have always had something to do with giving food to people in the context of whatever I am doing and calling it church. The other thing I guess I wanted to say in relation to this topic, if I'm on the right topic in my head, is just the idea of space in which people do feel comfortable or that are accepted or are welcome. And sometimes, no matter what the true hearts of people are, which might be completely on board with pretty much where they need to be in their Christian walk, sometimes our buildings and things get in our way and our traditions get in our way, and people aren't able to enter certain spaces, even if everybody's on board with we all want to worship together or whatnot. And I know people who who have had bad experiences in church buildings or don't feel comfortable going into big, beautiful church buildings or whatever for a whole host of reasons. And you can kind of try pointing the finger blame on whether that's the big, beautiful building builder's fault or whether it's, somebody else's fault. But at the same time, that's not necessarily where we need to start the conversation. It's just about making space for people, and that's why that's why we've dispensed with the building, I think, with the Welcome Church, and we worship outside with people because that's their home at this point, and we're seeking community with folks who have been shut out of a whole lot of structures. So that's sort of some of the sort of the church stuff of how I approach my work.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I mean, yeah, the church existed before there were walls, right? Actually, in many ways, the church existed to deconstruct those walls that can often be hostile. So, Reverend Holland, can you speak a little bit about how this has framed your theological and biblical framework has shaped your ministry?
I think what's been funny for me for this whole thing is, so last year, I started a program at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary on church revitalization and church planting. And the program was kind of derailed based on what was, planned in the syllabus. However, we all had to break out and do what we needed to do in our context and in our settings. And a huge part of what we focused in this program is the question of who is your community? Who are they? Do you recognize who they are? Are you listening to them? So what we're doing now in this food project has become a part of my culminating project that we're going through, because instead of trying to force what it means to kind of be this new 21st century church, it's like, well, we're actually going back to what it was in the very beginning, and that is getting next to the people. And one of the things that has always made sense for me, and huge conversations, folks concerned about what's going to happen to the church. Is it going away? How do we remain relevant? All of these things. Well, somebody said to me, don't let a good pandemic go to waste. Use that opportunity to get next to people who are actually looking for you right now. Like, people are looking for someone who cares and looking for someone who's willing to help in all various ways that you possibly can. So, I mean, food was, again, one of the major things we saw that we could get, next to and get in and start working through. But we also tried to set up ways where we could get COVID testing at our community. It didn't pan out exactly, but we were going in that direction. To Adan's point about voter registration and canvassing the area, we're doing some of that now as well, and getting next to people. And folks want to be connected and involved, using some asset-based community development. And a lot of what we've been doing for our volunteers is we've hired folks who live in the community, as well as folks who are coming to get food, ask them, are you willing to volunteer to be a part of this program? And a number of them have said yes. From various traditions, we've had some Muslim folks come and volunteer. And we've had, so when I think about what does it mean to be relevant, right, as a church, it means to be a part of your community. Like, just make it plain and simple. But we have to avail ourselves to that change, that it can't be business as usual or church as it used to be. And that's kind of how I grew up in church, and trying to figure out, well, where do we need to be? What does the community need? How can we support? And let's not make it a us and them type thing, but it's all of us in this together. So I think my framing has been, how do we pull the community close to one another and working through that? So I guess this has been a perfect time for me in particular. I never necessarily went to seminary to preach. I do it, I've done it, but I think where I am right now, honestly, is probably the sweet spot that God has called me to.
I'm just so excited because I feel affirmed in this group, and that's not how it's always been, because I'm not a pastor. Sometimes you're reverend, but reverend of what? Since you don't have an actual congregation. But in this space, I feel really affirmed, and I want to thank you. I wanted to say, though, in affirmation of congregations that are still in a mode of outreach ministry and giving to the poor and to the needy, that's also important. And without the support of many congregations around the presbytery and other groups that support us, we wouldn't be able to continue. It's really hard as a 501c3 on your own without a network around you to raise money. or to raise the goods that people need. And so we appreciate that, and I wanted to go on record to say that. I took a snapshot of what we looked like from January to August of 2019 and from January to August of 2020. And our donations, our food donations had increased by 54%. So churches recognized that there was and is a need, and they, of their own volition, found ways to contribute in the ways that they could. So I don't want to in any way paint a broad brush that says people aren't interested. I think that the issues are very complicated. And just as in the early church, they were complicated, in 2020, they seem more so.
I can give a
Yeah.
shout out for people.
Well, I want to actually, real quick, before we go there, Adan, I wanted to make sure you had a chance to share a little bit about how any of this stuff intersects with your own sense of call and framing. I know that that's been, I mean, you even talked about how you were missing preaching and doing Bible studies, but you haven't stopped. How has that framed and shaped how you've been caring for your neighbors?
Well, I feel closer to God, or I feel I've opened myself to let God be closer to me through Christ. I mean, some of us, we've been doing this already. It's just more intense now. So let's not, as the youngsters say, let's not get it twisted, because of our point of reference, because of our social contexts. We've been to Matthew 25 church before, it had to come up from the hierarchy. So that's one point. It's like, okay, the incarnation, that's my, let's keep it simple, right? We're doing incarnational ministry. That's one point. We are with the people, for the people, God with us, relational, and not just relationships with folks that are standing in line or getting food, but relationships that already exist with partner churches, as you said, Zuline. It's like we have partners. We're part of a denomination. We're not, we're a tribe. We have brothers and sisters, cousins, whatever we're a connectional church. So for me, that's, that puts us in a position where we are privileged or blessed to be a type of conduit or bridge between, our more privileged Anglo brothers and sisters that want to come in and put their theology into physical action as opposed to just sending resources. I think that's a reality that I, that humbles me. I have a family that they're well off. The mother would bring the 2 elementary age youth and a 6-year-old to Tuesdays and Thursdays for 3 months. That's to consider ourselves as a place where people can come that they would normally never come or get involved. That's holy. Holy means, separate, right? And we are considered by our Presbyterian brothers and sisters, like I'm coming from my partner churches, that they say, okay, we want to come. And that's, it's the Trinity. It's the relationship. It's the being for each other, pouring ourselves into each other. And when I say getting closer or opening up myself to be closer to Christ, I have 2 or 3 people now that are part of our whole, virtual worship, that because they volunteer, they come to worship, Bible study. Technology has, as a novice, as much of a novice as I am, Adan and WKM are now worshiping together. And I would never, ever do that. I never did that in my 15 years of ministry, because Adan is a little bit more traditional, organ music, formal. I love it. I get my Presbyterian formality out of the way when I'm there. But then when I come to WKM, it's off the cuff. It's informal. But yet, because of these times, we worship together and we have a Bible study together, and it's, us. We're not like big churches. And we started a book discussion group, and we're reading The Cost of Discipleship, and technology has been a blessing because, we had young adults from Yaden who graduated from high school, and one's off in Chicago, one's in Florida, and I have a former church member who's from WKM who's now, like in Georgia. So what I'm saying is it's a diverse group that is kind of scattered all over the country now that gets together for the worship, Bible study and stuff. So, relational Trinitarian, incarnational, being again a bridge, and trusting God, as try to think about so many different things, but I always just try to go back to Psalm 37, just like trust God and do good.
That's a good word. I mean, and I love how so much of what all of you have brought into here is reminding us that there's no like one scripture, one reference, one theological statement that is sending you into this space, but this is a part of what it means to be the church in everything. I mean, it's the bringing of all of that to bear in the world. Chris, I think to what you said about getting next to people, especially in a season of a distance, that can be a tough phrase to wrap your brain around when we're called to be apart. But at the same time, getting next to people can look so different. And then when you're bringing this into the conversation about Matthew 25, that's all about getting next to people in their various circumstances of struggle. And as you get next to people in those very spaces, that is indeed where you encounter the very face of Christ. And that face is sometimes in our neighbor, and sometimes we are the neighbor that is being poured into. And so grateful for the way that you have done that in your various ministries and contexts, getting next to the people in your communities. The last question, if you could just give us a brief word. The last question for us today is, given that the relational side of ministry is so deeply important in what it means to be the connectional church, for those that are listening to this conversation, what is your word of encouragement to the church? And that word of encouragement can also be a nudge. What is that you would have for us? Schaunel, it looks like you're leaning in there.
Oh, so the thing that we have, I feel we've consistently said, we've said many times, is that, both individuals and congregations and folks within congregations have very distinct gifts. And, if people sort of look at their gifts and what kind of interests them, if they kind of have something that they always get together and do anyway, a special project, or I bet there's a way that it matches somehow what we do with the Welcome Church. We do a lot. We know a lot of people who knit. We get a lot of donations of yarn from folks. We had a man who during the pandemic was hand sewing a quilt, and some folks who were involved with sewing that I know got word of that and started donating like thread and stuff like that, what they would want to do kind of anyway. And obviously anyone who has a love of like tea has donated a variety of teas to us historically, at different times. So if there's something that like speaks to you as a special thing that you're able to do for someone, there's a good chance that might be a need somebody else has too, if you get in touch and kind of reach out with that.
Adan, you're muted. Go ahead again.
I share, if I'm correct, or I feel the excitement, the joy that Chris feels. Like, this is despite the sadness of hunger and homelessness, like right now, it's exciting for us to with a capital W and an E to say we are the church. And it's a moment to embrace. It's a moment to embrace the times joyfully, because if we don't step up to do something now, we shouldn't be in this business, in this calling. So I'm excited because we can embrace and engage and adapt and be creative and be open to how the Spirit works. And I'll finish it with this. It's like, if you notice, a lot of the miracles that take place in Scripture, like Jesus is on the shore, right? And he says, throw the net on the other side of the boat. A lot of times the miracles take place after we are obedient. And if the call is to feed the hungry and clothe the naked, and it's not saying feed the hungry in spirit or blessed are the hungry, it's practical, hands-on mandates. And if we are obedient, I'm convicted, and I've seen it, that miracles take place. So I would say that to the church, like, be obedient, and you will be blessed, and miracles will take place.
I think for me, if I could encourage anyone out there who's listening to this, is don't be afraid to take a risk, because the thing you're trying to do, I believe God will honor. And even if it's not successful in your eyes, it's getting you closer to where God is calling you to be. And again, some of that is just starting to formulate some of these relationships. Real quick, when we weren't doing food, like I said initially, but we were in a relationship with a number of people. So one day I sat down with one of my colleagues. We just started making phone calls to folks that we already knew, that we had relationships with, and said, hey, here's what we're trying to do. Here's what we need help with. Do you know anyone? Who can you connect us to? And a week later, we have a food program. Like, I couldn't have scripted that we were taking the risk and trying to do something new, but then just called folks that we, had been talking to for a long time about different things, and just to put ourselves out there and, trying something different, trying something new, trying to be observant of what's going on, and then just stepping out and seeing what will work, not having to commit to it because it's going to change. But just taking that first step, and that step of faith, I believe God honors. So just go ahead and try, have that relationship, have that conversation, and take that step out there.
Thanks. Good word. And a final brief word, Zuline.
Well, all I can think about is the miracles, because Chester Eastside has been in a situation where we weren't sure for months and months whether we would continue, because we just didn't have all the resources that it requires to do this work. But our God is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we can ask or think. And so he's a superlative. God is superlative. And God is able to do more than I can ever ask, think, or dream about. And I think COVID-19 has really brought that close to my heart. It's been a time of affirmation, a time of consecration, and a time of relinquishment. Lord, I relinquish everything about who I am and what I'm trying to do and be to you. And God, you take charge of the work that you've called us to do. So I'm just filled up as I share with you all today.
Amen. Well, thank you for all four of you. This whole podcast series is called Conversations at the Well, and you all are indeed living water as you take sips of that living water from the well of Christ. Thank you so much for how you are a refreshing presence in your contexts and communities, and our prayers are with you. So God bless and go in peace.